Elias Kane stood before the judge, a ghost in the system, accused of a crime he never committed. But he wasn't in this courtroom for an acquittal. He was here to collect a debt. And the arrogant man on the bench, drowning in his own authority, had no idea the trap was already sprung. It began just after dawn. Elias's sedan was parked across from the old police substation on Hemlock Street. The town of Oak Haven, Georgia, hadn't changed. It was still a place that was very careful about who it allowed to feel comfortable. Elias wasn't there for comfort. He was there to watch. For weeks, he'd mapped the patterns. On paper, Elias Kane was a nobody. In reality, he was a former Navy SEAL, now a deep cover operative for the CIA. He watched his target, a local cop, step out of the diner and give a casual hand signal to a man down the street. It was subtle, too subtle. Elias felt the air shift, recognizing the distinct smell of a setup that was far too clean. Then the cruiser appeared. No lights, no siren, just pure predatory intent. Two white officers got out. One moved to block his rear bumper. The other marched to his window, swaggering with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. Elias lowered the glass halfway, his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The officer didn't ask a question. He tapped the window with his baton. "You look a little lost," he barked, his eyes dripping with contempt. "Let's see some ID. Now." Elias's voice was low and steady. "That's a mistake. That warning should have been enough." It wasn't. His rear door was ripped open. He was hauled out and slammed face down onto the hood of his car before a single charge was named. Then came the rehearsed shout, "He's resisting!" even though Elias hadn't moved a muscle. The cuffs clicked shut. No struggle, no resistance. Just calculated force, followed by a convenient lie. Across the street, Mrs. Dubois clutched her groceries. She'd seen this play her whole life. But this time felt different. Nearby, Maya Singh, a young journalist from Atlanta, had her phone out, recording on pure instinct. The man they were arresting hadn't fought. He just watched them, his eyes cold and knowing, as if he knew exactly how far they would go, and was letting them. They booked him anyway. They called it procedure. In the holding cell, Elias sat with his back straight, his gaze sharp. He was a man who had never learned how to bow. Behind the glass, a young deputy named Owen Riley watched him. He later whispered to a colleague, "Look at him. He's not a prisoner. He's a hunter in a blind." And he was. Elias let them take him, because the only way to gut a corrupt system is to let it swallow you whole and rot it from the inside out. Now that rot was sitting on a bench across the street, wearing a black robe and calling itself justice. And Judge Harlan Prescott had no idea the man he was about to humiliate had come to burn his world to the ground. They brought Elias into the courtroom in cuffs. It was a message. A hush fell over the room as he walked, chained but unbroken. Dressed in plain clothes, he somehow looked like the only one in control. Judge Prescott sat high on his bench, drumming his fingers in a restless, irritated rhythm. "Mr. Khan," he began, intentionally mispronouncing the name. His voice was like cold steel. "Let's not waste the court's time. Do you have a lawyer, or are you just here to put on a show for us?" Amelia Hayes, the court-appointed public defender, stood. "Your Honor, my name is Hayes. I've been assigned to Mr. Kane's case. We've only just—" Prescott cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Does your client understand the gravity of this? Assaulting an officer of the law isn't some parking ticket." Elias remained perfectly still, his silence a shield. Amelia turned to him, whispering, "Elias, you have to say something. If you enter a plea—" "There will be no plea," Elias said, his voice calm, his eyes locked on the judge. Prescott's eyebrows shot up. "Well, well, it speaks." A dry, grating laugh escaped his lips. He leaned forward with a sneer. "Then tell me, Mr. Kane, what exactly was a man like you doing parked outside a police station at 6 in the morning?" Amelia stiffened. "Objection, Your Honor. That assumes facts, not in evidence." "Sustained," Prescott muttered, annoyed. He turned his gaze back to Elias, his tone growing colder, smugger. "I see from this file you were a Navy SEAL. Imagine that." He leaned back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "They train you to be a weapon over there, just so you can come back here and act like a common thug?" Elias didn't flinch. "What's the matter?" Prescott pressed, his voice rising with theatrical frustration. Cat got your tongue? Or is this the part where you play the silent martyr? Still, Elias said nothing. He just stood there, his jaw set, his gaze a physical force. His silence was a weapon, and it was hitting its mark. In the gallery, Maya Singh scribbled furiously. She leaned toward Mrs. Dubois and whispered, "Why isn't he defending himself? He's letting that judge walk all over him." Mrs. Dubois never took her eyes off Elias. Her reply was soft, but sharp as a razor. "Honey, that man ain't quiet. He's listening, and that judge is telling him everything he needs to know." On the bench, Judge Prescott's composure was shattering. "You're not special, Mr. Kane. You don't intimidate this court. You're just another angry man who thinks his service record buys him a free pass on civility." Elias finally moved. He tilted his head just enough to meet the judge's eyes. His voice was low, firm, and final. "Do you really think I'm the one on trial here?" The courtroom froze. Prescott leaned back as if shoved, his smug mask cracking. A flicker of genuine fear crossed his face. Amelia Hayes blinked, stunned. Maya stopped writing. Mrs. Dubois nodded once, slowly. Desperate to regain control, Prescott's voice snapped like a whip. "Bail is denied. Hearing is set for Friday. Court adjourned." His gavel struck the wood with a crack that sounded more like a retreat than a ruling. As the guards led Elias away, he walked like a man whose mission could not be interrupted by steel bars. Maya leaned forward, whispering, "This is bigger than a not guilty verdict." Beside her, Mrs. Dubois' voice was low and certain. "No, dear. He came to collect." The next day, the courtroom tension was thick enough to taste. Elias walked in without cuffs, flanked by two guards who watched him like an unpredictable storm. Judge Prescott was already on the bench, his jaw tight. Elias's unreadable calm from the day before had clearly burrowed under his skin. "Bring the defendant forward," Prescott ordered, his voice flat. Elias moved into position, calm and centered. The judge's voice rose, raw with the need to regain his dominance. "Mr. Kane, you seem to believe your silence is a weapon. Let me be clear. In my courtroom, it just makes you look guilty. You are nothing in here. Not a soldier, not a hero. Just another number on my docket who will be stripped of any fantasy you're clinging to." Elias didn't move. His silence wasn't empty. It was active. It pressed into the judge's words, making them hollow. Prescott's lip curled into a snarl. "You think you're untouchable," he barked, the mask of impartiality gone. "You wear that uniform's honor like a shield, but it won't protect you in here. Not from me." The room went rigid. The bailiff shifted his weight. Maya's pen froze. Elias simply lifted his head and met the judge's hateful gaze. The look wasn't rage or fear. It was absolute control. It was a look that said, "I see you. I know what you are. And I am not the one who is afraid." The blood drained from Prescott's face. He fumbled with the papers on his desk, but they offered no shield from that stare. Near the jury box, Deputy Owen Riley leaned forward. He'd been a Marine, and he recognized Elias's stance. That was an operator. His eyes then caught the thin, surgical scar on Elias's wrist. Riley had seen one just like it before, in a med tent in Fallujah. He sat back slowly, a cold knot in his stomach. Everything he thought he knew was wrong. In the gallery, Maya was shaken. This wasn't law, it was venom. She pulled out her tablet and ran Elias's name through a series of backdoor searches she'd acquired covering foreign conflicts. Finally, a red box flashed on her screen. Access denied. Sage-level clearance. Counterintelligence flag. Lethal force authorized. Maya's heart pounded against her ribs. Who the hell was this man? Later, in the dim quiet of the holding cell, Deputy Riley stood outside the bars. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he whispered. "The teams?" Elias, sitting on the bench, gave a barely perceptible nod. That was enough. Riley asked no more. That night, Elias remembered a dusty rooftop, his team pinned down. He'd held up a finger. Wait. They waited. They lived. He had stayed behind, a willing captive, so they could escape. He had stayed silent through 3 days of darkness and pain then, too. The mission was always bigger than the man. This courtroom was no different. He was just watching the rot spread until he knew exactly where to cut. And that moment was getting close. The rot had a name: Harlan Prescott. It started years ago, after his son Richard was killed in a bar fight. The man who pulled the trigger, a black ex-soldier, claimed self-defense and walked on a technicality. Something inside the judge broke that day. The poison of a perceived injustice began to work its way through his veins. He started handing down harsher sentences to black defendants, especially veterans. It was no longer about the law. It was about revenge, served cold from behind the seal of the court. Judge Prescott had an ally, Sheriff Brody Callum, a man who knew where the bodies were buried because he'd helped dig the holes. Callum brought Prescott fabricated cases, arrests built on shaky testimony and conveniently missing body cam footage. And Prescott made them stick. Together they had built a quiet kingdom of fear, but they were not invisible. Maya Singh's investigation uncovered the pattern. 7 black veterans, all facing Prescott and Callum, all accused of aggression. One had filed a complaint against the sheriff's department, then vanished a week later. Maya stared at a photo of the 2 men laughing at a county fundraiser. This wasn't just corruption, it was a hunt. The pressure was building. At CIA headquarters in Langley, a red light blinked on a secure monitor. Elias Kane. "Ma'am, Operation Kingfisher's going critical," an analyst told the director. "He's moving to end it." "He's off book," the director replied, her voice tight. "He doesn't have authorization to break cover." The analyst's voice was quiet. "With respect, ma'am, I don't think he's asking for permission." In Oak Haven, the threats began. A dead-of-night call to Maya's motel. A text from a blocked number. "Stop digging or you'll disappear like the others." Her hands trembled, but her resolve hardened into steel. Meanwhile, Deputy Owen Riley, tormented by his conscience, slipped a folded paper into Elias's cell. It was a list, the names of the men Prescott and Callum had erased from the system. When Elias read it, the final lock clicked into place. He was done waiting. By morning, the courthouse was a powder keg. Maya's article, "The Soldier Who Fought with Silence," had gone viral overnight. Reporters swarmed the steps. Veterans in worn jackets stood in a silent, supportive formation. The public was finally awake. Inside, Judge Prescott banged his gavel, his face a mask of contempt. "We will proceed. Mr. Kane," he sneered, "does the defendant have anything to say before I render my judgment?" The courtroom fell silent. Elias stood tall. For the first time, his eyes swept the room, finally landing on the judge. "I do." His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner with absolute authority. "My name is Officer Elias Kane, Central Intelligence Agency, ID code 81 Delta 9. A collective gasp went through the room. Prescott's face went white. Sheriff Callum, standing by the door, froze completely. "For the past 6 months," Elias continued, his voice like ice, "I have been leading Operation Kingfisher, a federal investigation into systemic corruption and civil rights violations within this county." He looked directly at the judge, "Specifically into you, Judge Harlan Prescott, and you, Sheriff Brody Callum." Prescott shot to his feet. "This is contempt of court. I'll have you." "You will be silent," Elias cut him off. He held up the list Riley had given him. "Because I have the names of the 12 men you and the sheriff made disappear, and I have a full confession from one of your guards, recorded on a federal wire." As he spoke, the main courtroom doors swung open. A dozen federal agents in tactical gear stepped inside, their purpose unmistakable. "Harlan Prescott," Elias commanded, his voice ringing with finality, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of felony murder." The judge collapsed into his chair, speechless. Callum bolted for a side exit but was slammed against the wall by 2 agents before he took 3 steps. The lead agent approached the bench and read Prescott his rights while another agent reached up and stripped the black robe from his shoulders, leaving him exposed and small. The sound of Callum's handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the stunned silence. An hour later, in a sterile interrogation room, Prescott and Callum sat at a steel table. In front of them were 2 documents, full confessions and their immediate resignations. "You sign these," the U.S. attorney told them, his voice devoid of emotion, "and you might see the sun again someday. You don't, and you will die in a federal supermax prison." With shaking hands, they signed away their power. From behind the one-way glass, Elias Kane watched. He didn't smile. He simply observed as the debt was paid in full. This wasn't about finding justice. It was about delivering a consequence.